suppose it's almost a cliche to say that employees don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. Here in South Africa, we read that a third of employees resign from their jobs because of a toxic boss. Well, let's talk about that. Professor Renata Skuman from the University of Stellenbosch is with us and believes that leaders often contribute to problems in the workplace. So here's the question: how can aspiring managers become better leaders? Professor, welcome to you in Cape Town. Thanks very much for joining us today. I've just made the point that a third of South Africans resign from their jobs because of a bad boss. Maybe a good place to start is a definition of what a bad boss is.
Sure, that is a broad definition, Jeremy, but I think if we start with a bad boss is someone that doesn't take care of his employees, but also don't take care of himself. But if we focus on what a bad boss can do to an employee, is someone that don't give guidance, that is inconsistent, that is untrustworthy, that is unethical, and the list go on. But if you look at the surveys, what they've done, some of the reasons that employees really consider a boss to be bad is when it's someone that do not create a safe workspace, that have unreasonable demands in terms of overtime, and also take credit for work they didn't do themselves.
How do you find the balance between a tough work environment in a difficult economy and then the line where it sometimes becomes abusive?
I think we're all sitting currently in a situation where work is tough, where there's maybe additional demands, where we have to work harder to make the profits or to do what we should do, and often the work staff is smaller because of retrenchments and everything. But if there is a communal goal, if the vision is clear, if it's a healthy culture, people in general do not mind working harder. But it's when it becomes unreasonable and when there is no consideration for personal difficulties, where people are not supported when they go through a tough time in terms of having access to care, for example, which can really make it toxic. And also where people don't work together towards a communal goal but start to work against each other, where it becomes unhealthy competition and where people discredit each other instead of working as a team.
So whose responsibility is it then, Professor, to set the culture? Is it up to the manager, the leader, or is it something that is developed organically within an organization with input from all stakeholders in the process?
Unfortunately, what has been shown through the research is, according to the proverb as well, a fish rots from the head. So the leaders play a very, very important role. And unfortunately, especially in very hierarchical organizations, people at the lower levels have very little input. But we all have an opportunity now where organizational reform can happen, when we can change a culture. And even if you can just change your team, so it has a ripple effect. If one team have a better culture and we influence is there, so the senior manager or even a lower manager have a better interaction and take better care of the team, it does have a ripple effect in the organization. But ultimately, it is unfortunately still up to the leader. And if that person is then not really considering the employees and a healthy culture, unfortunately we see it doesn't matter what people at the ground level do, it can still not be successful.
Often it requires a degree of courage from the employee because they are fearful of losing their job if they raise issues of conflict and negativity as far as culture is concerned.
Yes, absolutely. And often what we see, one of the risk factors for burnout is a value clash. And I often talk when I speak to people in corporate organizations, or even when I work with students or patients, that it's very important to see where is your circle of influence actually ending and when it is better for you to make a change, if you can make a change in the current economic climate. What is important there also to distinguish is that the responsibility of the employee is also to take care of themselves. That we also need to make sure that they do have support mechanisms that they actually access, because some organizations have good support mechanisms, but people, because of the fear of stigma, do not access these support mechanisms. And then lastly, what is very, very important, and especially internationally, there's a movement of how to protect whistleblowers, because people are scared to speak up, and especially in workplace bullying, up to 20% of people are aware of bullying but don't speak up about it because there's no safeguards for the whistleblower, and that's where anonymous report channels is also extremely important.
And important to recognise the problem as soon as possible and do something about it, because there can often be not only a psychological manifestation of the abuse but also a physical manifestation. You start to feel terrible.
Absolutely. So it has huge emotional impacts if there is workplace bullying in terms of anxiety, depression, but also in terms of the physical toll it creates or takes on a person, the strain they take. They can struggle with sleeping problems, gastrointestinal problems. They might start to abuse alcohol or other substances, but it also have economic implications for an organization. If we look at a 2016 study that was done in terms of the influence of stress, anxiety and depression in the workplace, we know that it costs South African economy up to $17 billion per year for people that remain ill at work and do not access the necessary treatment.
Do you think we're seeing an increase in toxic managers in this country?
I would hope not. There's no official studies that I can quote for you. I think why we see a rise is also that people do start to speak up more, which is a good thing. So previously in the country, maybe certain cultures, we accepted that it might be a more autocratic leader that might have been bullying and have unreasonable demands, and people just accepted that. But I think that the culture of acceptance is decreasing, where people do push back. So that's maybe why we see an increase in the incidents without it really be an increase, luckily. It's more that people are more aware of it and realize that this leadership style is not appropriate and that it's not beneficial to the organization.
Right. In conclusion, Professor, let me close the circle if I can. Assume that you have been in a situation of corporate abuse. You've resigned. How then, as an employee, do you start the recovery process?
The very first thing I would recommend is to get professional support, whether it's a psychiatrist or psychologist, but there is a real process of grief that you need to go through, and also acceptance that the problem was not necessarily you, but that the damage to your self-confidence and also the anxiety when you re-enter a new corporate organization can be very real. So really to close the previous chapter, but then also to learn skills about what can you do next time? How can I take better care of myself emotionally? And how can I also upskill myself in terms of communication, in terms of assertiveness, in terms of how to manage next time, maybe a bit earlier, when I am exposed to a toxic boss or a toxic environment.
A third of employees resigning from their jobs because of a toxic boss. Thank you so much for the insight. Professor Renata Skuman with us, psychiatrist, associate professor in leadership at the University of Stellenbosch's Business School.